We have all been uniquely and lovingly created in the image of God and called to live in fusion with Him and with one another. I'm Robert Ricciardelli, and welcome to the Converging Zone. Welcome to the Converging Zone. Let me ask you a question. What if I were to tell you that one of the greatest atrocities in the history of mankind, the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews were eliminated, and there was a company, an American company, well known by many, that willingly and knowingly assisted in this genocide? What would you say to that? We have a man with us today, Edwin Black, who's done his homework and given us a book called IBM and the Holocaust. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is IBM, the company we're going to talk about. Welcome to the show today, Edwin Black. Edwin.
Robert, thank you for having me.
What is this all about, this IBM and the Holocaust? Is this for real?
Yeah, it's a very, very sad story, but it's a very true story. IBM, under the micromanagement of its chairman and president, Thomas J. Watson, acting directly from New York and later through his overseas subsidiaries, co-planned and co-organized all 6 phases of the Holocaust: the identification of the Jews, the expulsion from society, the confiscation of their assets, the ghettoization, the deportation, and even the extermination. The Auschwitz tattoo actually began as an IBM number.
That is unbelievable. Where did you find your research?
Well, the story of how I got the story was when you go into the Holocaust Museum, the first thing you see when you walk in is the IBM machine. My parents are Holocaust survivors. My mom was pushed out of a train on the way to Treblinka, and she was shot and buried in a mass grave with her legs sticking out of the snow. And my father just walked away from one of those shooting pits where they just mow everybody down. And he found her in the woods, and they pulled her out of the snow, cut away the gangrene, and they lived in the woods for a couple of years, lived out the war. They came to the United States, had me, and I was with my parents in the Holocaust Museum when the first thing we saw was this large machine. It's the first exhibit with IBM on it. No one understood what it was about. Even the museum didn't even know why it was there, but they had found it. It was very, very important. Now, that machine is gone now. If you go to the museum, you'll notice 2 marble plugs in the floor where they've taken away the exhibit, removed the main machine, and replaced it with a smaller machine. So the IBM logo is now a faded decal on the other side. That's a different story. But what's important to understand is that what IBM did was they went after the Third Reich and said, we are the solutions company, and there's no solution we won't give you, including the final solution. When I saw this machine in the Holocaust Museum, I pledged and vowed to myself and to my parents that I would answer the question, how do you connect IBM with the Holocaust? And so I assembled a team of some 100 researchers, translators, historians, second generation, working in 7 countries, dozens of archives, and that's how we assembled the inescapable conclusion that IBM consciously organized the Holocaust. Now, how, you say? Well, when Hitler came to power, he wanted to destroy the entire Jewish community, not only in Germany, but in all of Europe and indeed the world. To do that required the resources of a computer. But in 1933, there was no computer. What there was the Hollerith punch card, about the size of a dollar bill, where information was punched in the holes and the rows and the columns, and as that was read through a feeder, then that out came information. Think of it as a player piano or a music box, which can strike various chords, and out comes a sound. Except, of course, this was the devil's music. So, IBM came to the Hitler regime IBM had the worldwide monopoly on information technology, on the information age, which you and your viewers wrongly believe began in Silicon Valley, but in fact was born in Berlin in 1933. And what is the information age? It is the individualization of statistics. It means that prior to this punch card technology, which IBM stole from the Census Bureau at the end of the 19th century, prior to that, you could count the number of people in a room on your hands and on your toes. But could you tell the story of how many were men and how many were women and how many were educated and how many were not? And how many were born here and how many were born there? It is only the IBM technology that cross-tabulated all that information from all these holes being punched that brought that information to the fore. And when Hermann Hollerith, a German-American, and of course the IBM company embarked upon this technology, they realized that they could process any information about any person, any place, any process, any transportation. And that's exactly what they did for the Hitler regime.
You mentioned 6 phases of the Holocaust. Can you describe how IBM assisted in each of those 6 phases?
Okay, follow me. The first stage is identification of the Jews. So they said to Hitler, what do you want to happen first? He says, I need to know where are the Jews in Nazi Germany, because we have some Jews who are wearing curls and black hats, some who are in the synagogue, and of course we're having some Jews who are in business suits, who are actually practicing Lutherans and Catholics, and who have no idea that they even are Jews. But we don't believe a Jew is a Jew because he prays to the Jewish Torah or in a synagogue. We believe a Jew is in fact a person with Jewish blood. We believe this because the Carnegie Institution and the Rockefeller Foundation have laid the scientific groundwork in a specious science called eugenics. And so we need to track all these people back for generations and find out exactly which one of them is a half a Jew, a quarter Jew, a 16th Jew. And so IBM said, not a problem, we will invent the racial census. Now, what is the racial census? Well, we'll hire 10,000, 100,000 people, however many is needed, and we'll have them go door to door and fill out the census questionnaires. They'll all come back to one warehouse in Berlin. We will, in fact, process those with legions and armies of people typing the information into our punch card machines. And in one column, we'll put down the religion. And a second column, we'll put down the mother tongue. And a third column, we'll put down the nationality. And a fourth column, we'll put down the city. And a fifth column, we'll put down the profession. Like that, 64,000 cards per hour. Suddenly, for the first time, Hitler knows exactly how many Jews of Polish extraction are practicing attorneys in Berlin. Once you have those names, you go to phase 2. You've identified the Jews, and it's not just one census. It's the birth certificates, it's the marriage bureaus, it's the funeral homes, it's the baptismal books going back generations. Once you have that, you juxtapose that against the Bar Association, the Medical Association, the faculty rolls, the health cooperatives. You exclude the Jews from all of those professions. And now they can't work. We go to phase 3, confiscation, not a problem. All the banks, financial institutions in Nazi Germany are running on IBM punch cards. IBM creates a special routine, a special card. Each one was customized, each process was customized, and they find all the Jewish bank accounts, all the Jewish property. Now we can grab that, we can Aryanize it, we can pauperize the Jews. And now that we've got their money, we go to step 4, ghettoization. One day, all the Jews pick up, they move across town, 8 families to a flat, Everybody knows their street. Everybody knows their address. Everybody knows their stairwell. Everybody knows their apartment. No confusion. Traffic management. All in a day. We go to step 5. Deportation. All the trains in Nazi Europe are running on IBM punch cards, including the one at 22 Pavierstrasse in Krakow, which, under the supervision of a Polish worker by the name of Leon Krzyminski, would supervise these trains going 40 kilometers away into Auschwitz, filled with Jews going in, empty coming out. And then phase 6, there was an IBM customer site in every concentration camp. The name of that customer site was the Haller Abteilung, the IBM department. And they programmed a special procedure, IBM did, which was called extermination by labor, where they organized all of your skills. I'm an auto mechanic, I'm a farm worker, I'm a mason, and they juxtaposed that against the slave labor, moved people back and forth across Europe, worked them to death. And then when they could no longer work, they were gassed. And IBM had special codes in the concentration camps for whether a Jew was worked to death, shot in the back of the head for violating some rule, or sent in the gas chamber. Sonderbehandlung, special treatment, gas chamber. And initially, the prisoner number that IBM gave to every prisoner was tattooed on the Auschwitz arm. Later, it was subsumed by many other numbering systems, but it began as an IBM number. And as such, the Holocaust that we know is something very different today because of IBM. There would have always been a Holocaust because my father walked away from just a massacre. But the Holocaust that we know, the Holocaust of the giant numbers, the Holocaust of the 6 million, this is the IBM Holocaust. This is the Hollerith Holocaust.
Was this just in Germany? Was it all over Europe?
Not only was this exported from Germany into the entire continent, IBM actually moved across Europe in cadence with the Nazi takeover of the continent. So that means when the Blitzkrieg was launched in 1939 with the invasion of Poland, IBM opened up a special subsidiary in Poland to organize the rape of Poland. When the Nazis were getting ready to go into Holland, they opened up a special subsidiary in Amsterdam to organize the massacre and destruction of the Dutch Jews. And these companies were not known as IBM. They were actually named for Thomas Watson. They were called Watson Business Machines. And this sort of technique, this sort of pattern, was all over the continent. In fact, machines were pulled out of war-torn Poland into Romania, and the documentation shows this so clearly. With the help of the State Department and the commercial attaché in Berlin in the days before we entered World War II after Pearl Harbor, just to make sure that Romania, which was a vicious, vicious, bloody massacre of a Holocaust, had the most up-to-date equipment to do what this program needed it to do.
You know, talking to you, Edwin, your family, your mom and your dad escaped. Obviously, you're here. The rest of your family, their brothers, sisters, grandparents, your grandparents, uncles, aunts, you would have had, were they all lost?
Yeah, all gone.
Wow. And, you know,
you know your grandparents, right?
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, yeah. You never got to meet them. As the many of you've met around this country.
But I think that IBM knew their number.
IBM knew their number. How did IBM get away with this all these years until now that we're actually getting some exposure to this through your book and your research?
Well, for one, historians have always been interested in documenting the scope of the brutality. And most of them were born in the carbon paper age. I'm a product of the computer age, just as you are. And so not only did they not have the answers to what IBM did, they didn't even know the questions to pose. So 6 million people in the United States, the best scholars, the best students, the best diplomats, the best leaders from all quarters saw this machine before I ever saw it and never asked a question because it was the biggest tree in the forest. And everyone just looked around it. And no one could understand how it worked. And no one had the ability or the drive or the compulsion or the passion to go to the ends of the earth to assemble all the many threads that weave into this terrible picture of destruction, collusion, conspiracy, and corporate genocide.
Did you, when you were researching this book, and by the way, it's the book IBM and the Holocaust. We'll have Edwin's website across the screen there. When you did the research on this book, did you start discovering others that were beginning to ask the same questions? I mean, did you find others that were doing some sort of investigation on this whole atrocity?
I found, basically, it was a very closed-door investigation, although we had it vetted by scores of the best scholars on the planet, because the book came out simultaneously in 40 countries and 9 languages on a single day in February of 2001, and it was vetted by every competent libel lawyer and local expert. But most people didn't even know this was possibly possible. They didn't believe it was inconceivable. In fact, the president of the Bundesarchiv, that's the federal German archives, gave examples of these Häftlingscards, these prisoner cards, and said, look, they're just paper. But by looking at the paper and examining the numbers, you get to see that these pieces of paper were punched in to the code, and so you can compare the prisoner cards to the secret IBM concentration camp codes, and you see that they match up. Furthermore, we went to Auschwitz to the archivist. He says, we have 6,000 cards, punch cards. We have no idea what they're used for. IBM suppressed this information. It never came out in the Nuremberg trials. Now, why didn't it come out in the Nuremberg trials? Do you know why?
I have no idea.
Well, who organized all the evidence and the exhibits at the Nuremberg trials? IBM.
Wow.
And there was, as I say, an IBM customer site with either machines or possibly with sorting operations in every concentration camp. At Dachau, right across from the gate. In Mauthausen, it was across from the parade grounds. In Auschwitz, it was next door to IG Farben in Auschwitz too. IBM said, you will never prove that we were in Auschwitz. I actually found their phone number in the Auschwitz phone book.
Wow.
And I published that too in the current edition.
After you did this investigation, were some of these things now being suppressed, or they tried to cover up some of the stuff that you just uncovered? Were any of that going on?
There was never any attempt to, well, there was an attempt to suppress the information, to keep it out of my hands. They moved the files around from place to place. But ultimately, what IBM has done in the 11 years since they were exposed as mass murderers, and since Watson was exposed not as a hero for a game show computer, but as a war criminal, they have pursued a path of silence. The morning after this segment airs, the producers will not get a call from IBM. IBM will say nothing because IBM knows that it is guilty of genocide and it has never been able to question a comma of any sentence in the book.
Wow. Why did Thomas J. Watson and IBM risk so much and put so much devotion into this genocide?
Well, when Watson set up a subsidiary in occupied Poland, it wasn't because he hated the Polish people. And when he put one in Holland, it wasn't because he hated Dutchmen. And when the IBM cards were being used to calculate the trajectories for the V rocket to hit lower Manhattan, it wasn't because he hated New Yorkers. For Thomas J. Watson, for IBM, it was never about the Nazism. It was never about the anti-Semitism. It was always about the money, because business was this company's middle name.
So they committed genocide for the money.
Money. Unlike Henry Ford, who aligned himself with Hitler because he hated the Jews, unlike the president of General Motors, Sloan, who made the Blitz truck for the Blitzkrieg, unlike the Carnegie Institution and the Rockefeller Foundation, which were seeking the master race here in America and exported it to Nazi Germany, seeking a blonde, blue-eyed stereotype, Aryan stereotype. They did it for reasons of evil conscience or misguided science. In the case of Watson, a sociopath, a man who was a convicted criminal working for National Cash Register before he ever came to IBM, a man who was a convicted swindler, an extortionist, before he was ever hired by IBM. Thomas Watson could not see the difference between right and wrong, just as a sociopath cannot. Just as a colorblind person could not tell the difference between the green of money and the red of blood. And a tone-deaf person could not hear the difference between a cry for help and a baby's melody. Thomas J. Watson was only concerned about the accretion of success, about the acceleration of his program, and about the acquisition of his objective, which was money.
If you look back now, like you said, there was going to be murder, there was going to be blood based on where Hitler was going with this thing. What would the impact have been different without IBM's assistance in this genocide?
There's no way to know how many fewer or how many more would have died without IBM. But remember, what the Nazis were doing in the East by mowing Jews down with machine guns, those were massacres. What IBM enabled the Nazis to do was the industrialized, automated, organized, methodical, accelerated Holocaust. And so it's kind of the difference between the calculations you could do with a paper and pencil and that with which you could do on a computer. It was vast, it was fast, and it was deadly. And there's no way to predict how many could have been saved.
Millions?
You see, if only IBM would have stopped printing the punch cards, even in the darkest hour of the Holocaust, it would have been like rifles without bullets. But they never stopped printing the cards. They even sued a printer in Berlin in 1942 for patent infringement for trying to print his own cards. They wanted it all.
What does it say about today? I mean, something like this happened, it didn't get uncovered until someone took notice. There's an IBM machine in this museum, why is it there, like yourself, and decided to uncover this thing. in America today, what else, I mean, looking at our audience, what does this speak to us for today?
Well, today we have Google and Microsoft and Yahoo who are catering to the whims and the wills of the despotic regimes. The communist regime in China censors Google every day. If they decide to boycott a humanitarian conference, that conference is blocked from Google. If the conference will have an empty chair for China, you can't even Google the word chair. In the case of the New York Times, they exposed the personal wealth of the ruling family of China, and the New York Times itself was completely blocked. When the Green Revolution in Iran attempted to unseat Ahmadinejad and begin a truly democratic wave in Iran, they were tracked down by their cell phones. That's because Nokia Siemens gave Iran the tracking codes so that they could find where these people were hiding. They could triangulate and pinpoint locate them, kidnap them, if you will, and put them into the prisons, arrest them, torture them, rape them, kill them. We are seeing this unfold every day. And that's why when the rallying call of this book, IBM and the Holocaust, and that is why the rallying call of my own mission to tell the story, is that when we say never again, we actually mean never again must American corporate muscle, American technological innovation be used to afflict innocent civilians.
I recommend getting this book, IBM and the Holocaust. He's written 10 books, Edwin Black is. We've had some good time together over Mexican food, one of his favorites. And every one of these books has been intriguing. So I would recommend getting all of his books if you can. But this is what we're talking about today. Edwin, how can they find you? Where can they find you?
They can find me at edwinblack.com, and they can find my books on Amazon or any bookstore in the world. And if they can't get them there, they can always go to edwinblack.com. And thank you very much for having me.
Great having you. Thank you for being with us on the Converging Zone. In just a few minutes, we get to see Edwin once again. So come back with us.